I've talked before about the different layers in society, the ranks in society, the hierarchies, and about the sort of partitioning between them. I'm not talking about class hierarchy or hierarchies of power. I'm talking about the sort of um, intangible layers and levels in society, intellectual levels, for example, moral levels, levels of understanding, and so on. You really have to think about it this way. You know how people are talking about these days about the multiverse and all that, about parallel timelines and so forth. Multi dimensions and what have you. Well, yes, in a very real way, right here in this life, we're living amidst multiple parallel universes because not everyone acts like they live in the same world that the rest of us do. You see what I mean? I mean, it's actually quite important for you to be able to understand this, for you to be able to identify when you are interacting with someone who actually exists in some sort of parallel alternative reality. Because you interact with people like that every day, believe it or not, whether you are aware of it or not. I mean, a very obvious example would be someone like Sean Diddy Combs. This person does not live in and does not operate in, does not perceive the same world that the rest of us live in. But he's just an extreme example. You will encounter all sorts of lesser examples in your life. And you really have to be able to recognize this when it happens. You must be able to recognize this when it happens. Because, for example, they look like you, they're here in this world like you. They exist in the world that you perceive and live in. Or anyway, they seem to. Because you can see them, you can interact with them, they're real. But they don't live in the same world you do. They live in an alternative parallel reality, intellectually, morally, and in terms of their values and their beliefs and their understanding and so on. You know, these are real existing layers and levels that we have to understand. We're all walking on the same earth, but we don't all live in the same world. Now, of course, everyone can see this, and everyone can understand this when you're talking about classes, class hierarchies, for example, income status, and so on. Everyone knows that the world that a billionaire lives in is completely different than the world that a working class person lives in or a poor person. You know, they really may as well exist in different isolated universes. There's no comparison between the two. We all know that. We all understand that. But I'm telling you that you need to apply this same sort of understanding in other ways with regards to other types of dimensional existences, say. People live in one moral universe and other people live in a completely different moral universe, and that's the reality. The same goes for intellect. The same goes for experience and expertise and so on. So one person is walking around in an intellectual universe, for example, in which it seems rational to believe that the Earth is a disk and not a globe. And he truly believes that. Okay? That's a parallel universe that he exists in. He's in that dimension. And you're never going to be able to meaningfully interact with this person in your intellectual universe. It's just like a glitch that you can even see and talk to a person like that. You know, your paths are not ever supposed to even cross. You see what I mean? This intellectual universe is never supposed to be breached by that intellectual universe. You know, if you talk to someone who believes that the Earth is flat, that's like a cross-dimensional interaction. But the intellectual physics of your universe do not apply in his, and his don't apply in yours. So the interaction between the two of you is functionally nullified and useless and pointless. No understanding can ever be reached. Because the intellectual physics of his world and the intellectual physics of your world are not the same. You see what I mean? So I'm saying there's simply no point in that kind of interaction. So because there's no physical partitions between parallel intellectual universes, you have to set up your own. You have to set up your own partitions. You know? I mean, this especially applies on the internet. Obviously. Obviously it applies on the internet. Because you're going to hear things and see things and read all kinds of things that are coming from completely different universes than the one that you live in. So you'll get angry. You know, you'll get hurt by what you see. You'll get disgusted by what you see and so on. You'll feel provoked, you'll feel bothered, you'll feel disturbed, all sorts of things. Because you're like breaking a dimensional barrier that you're not supposed to cross. That dimensional barrier is not supposed to be crossed. Or else others are breaking it and interfering in invading your universe. These are intellectual dimensions, moral and ethical and values and belief-based dimensions. So, what they say or how they act seems crazy to you or offensive to you because it is crazy and it is offensive in the world you live in. But what you say sounds just as crazy to them. See? It's like rabid Zionists, for example. They make sense in that parallel universe where they live, but they're completely abominable in ours. Like it would be so much easier. It would be so much easier if they occupied a light and sound spectrum that was beyond what we could see and hear. So they could exist and we wouldn't see them. And they could speak and we wouldn't hear them. That would be ideal. It's not the case. But that's as it should be. Because they're only ever really talking to each other. This is what you have to understand. They're only ever really communicating with other people who occupy the same alternative universe that they live in, where massacring babies and starving people does not violate the moral physics of that strange parallel dimension that they exist in. No, there are different moral worlds. There are different intellectual worlds, just as much as there are different worlds of class and different worlds of income and different worlds of power. And you have to understand this phenomenon. Because otherwise you will constantly try to make sense out of what makes no sense in the universe that you live in. Rather than just recognizing that, oh, they don't live in the world that I live in. And I have nothing to do with their world, and they have nothing to do with mine. This is what you have to understand. This is putting up that partition. In other words, the appropriate course of action is indifference, not interaction. That's how you have to approach it. Like the people who participated in those Diddy parties, for example. Okay, according to a certain way of looking at it, and maybe even in some cases, perhaps you can say that the people at those parties, or some of the people in those parties, it could be divided between predators and victims. But the whole monstrosity took place in a completely different moral world than ours. I mean, none of it, none of that is normal. None of what they did is normal. No one involved in that on any level lives in the same moral universe that is lived in by most of the people on this earth. And then to a lesser degree, we have this issue that's going around now in the online Muslim sphere about misyar marriages, secret second wives and so on. And the women who are involved in these things are being sympathized with and being depicted as victims. Okay, to some extent that may be true, and in some cases. But I mean, who does that? Who agrees to that? Who's even attracted to the kind of man who would want that? So I'm saying these are people who both occupy the same strata, morally, the same level, the same tier of morality, the same tier of ethical evolution. And people who occupy a certain lower level, morally and ethically, on the hierarchy, they're going to do the kind of things that people on that level do, and not the kind of things that the people on a higher tier would do. And what those people get up to down there at that level, well, that's not informative about anyone on any other tier of morality. So it doesn't alarm me. You see what I mean? Because people at lower levels do lower level things. And most people are not living at that low level. And if someone from a lower level on the moral hierarchy pulls someone down from a higher level, or really what you can call the normal level of morality, of the moral hierarchy, well, that constitutes them corrupting that person. And no one corrupts anyone except for someone who is at a low level doing it to someone who is at a higher level. And this is why I'm saying you have to be able to recognize when someone does not actually live in your same moral or intellectual area code. Because if you treat them as normal, if you treat them like they are inhabitants of your level, and they're not, well, then they can pull you down. They can pull you down and corrupt you. And if we're talking about intellectual levels, then they can pull you down intellectually and humiliate your mind, devalue your mind, make you foolish. That's degradation. An intelligent person arguing with a fool is a form of intellectual corruption. It's like debating truth with a liar. That's the intellectual equivalent of falling in love with a hooker. I'm not joking. They don't care any more about truth than a hooker cares about chastity and loyalty. So you have no business getting involved in something like that. No one's going to protect your honor, the honor of your intellect, the honor of your morality, except for you. Certainly not people who live in a moral and intellectual universe that doesn't even hold morality, or doesn't even hold that morality or intellect need to be honored. When fools talk to you, or when fools try to debate you or troll you or what have you, try to disturb you, that's like a cross-dimensional breach. And if you're not careful, they'll suck you through a portal into their parallel foolish universe, and you may never get out again. And that goes the same with the moral universe that you live in. Like if you're a Muslim sister and some man comes and proposes misyar marriage to you, or secret marriage as a second wife, and you're not already someone who thinks that things like that are perfectly fine, if you're not already morally fine with that, then that represents a cross-dimensional breach, and he's trying to drag you through a portal into his morally inferior universe, and you might get stuck there if you go through. And I've talked about this before, but every Muslim from the Muslim world, and in fact most people in the global South, Muslim or non-Muslim, they experience this kind of cross-dimensional breach anytime they interact with a Westerner. And for most Muslims, this is what we experience anytime we interact with non-Muslims, especially Westerners. Westerners and non-Muslims live in and perceive and operate in a completely different universe than us. And frankly, you come across as absolutely mental. I'll be honest. This is what I was talking about when I said that being American or being European is really a condition more than a nationality. Because you people normalize completely abnormal ways of thinking. Wallahi. Abnormal ways of understanding. Abnormal ways of being. That's all been normalized for you. It's completely alien to most people. And certainly to most Muslims. So for us, for Muslims, you can say that there are two main parallel universes coexisting on earth simultaneously. There's the universe of imaan and the universe of kufr, simultaneously occupying the same space. The world you see is not the world we see. The way you act in the world is not the way we act in the world. The way that it is acceptable to act in your world is not acceptable to act like that in ours. And yes, anytime we interact, that opens a portal between your kufri dimension and our dimension of iman. And inevitably, both of us are trying to bring the other over into our world. We are trying to bring you over into iman, and you're trying to bring us over into kufr. We're trying to bring you up, and you're trying to pull us down. That's the basic permanent dynamic of any interaction between us. And the only way that those interactions can ever be beneficial is when you open the portal with the inclination to come through to our side, and not with the inclination to try to drag us into your world. Because frankly, that's a hostile intention. Because the moral and intellectual world of the Muslims is higher. It's at a higher level. And if you don't want to come up, at least don't try to bring us down. Now, we're all people. I'm not saying that. We're all people. We're all human beings. And everyone can live as they like. I'm not saying otherwise. To you, your way. To us, ours. But I am saying that everyone has to try to understand what moral and intellectual universe they occupy. And they need to learn to recognize when someone exists in an alternative universe. So you can adjust your expectations and you can manage your interactions accordingly. Because 9 times out of 10, you probably shouldn't be interacting with those people in the first place. Again, it's like the Western obsession with debates and polemics and so on. You know, in my opinion, a Muslim has no business being involved in any of that nonsense. That is self-degrading to your own intellect and to your own morality. Because in Western debates, truth is irrelevant. They're not designed to reveal or to uncover or to reach the truth. It's a point-scoring system. It's not a system for establishing correctness or establishing truth. It's a game of trading shots, trading barbs. And this is just in accordance with the intellectual and the moral physics of the alternative universe that the West lives in. It's a truth-free zone. It's just like the fights in those superhero movies. There's no stakes. It's all just spectacle. Because that's all you're left with. Spectacle. That's all you're left with when you no longer care about the truth. But Muslims, alhamdulillah, we live in a universe where truth is fundamental. It is as fundamental to our physics as gravity. For us, values and principles are things that you're supposed to live by. But for them, those values and principles are things that they just perform. In fact, for them, values and principles are usually performed precisely to deflect and to distract or to camouflage actions that violate the very values and principles that they are performing. You see what I mean? Our values prevent us from committing crimes, while their values are only offered as an alibi for the crimes that they are committing. You know, in other words, they commit genocide but declare to the world their commitment to never again. Or you can't accuse us of doing things that we've publicly proclaimed ourselves to be against. No. Huh. It's like someone who's been caught on CCTV camera, caught on camera committing a crime, but he keeps telling you that he was home in bed at the time that the crime was committed. And he expects that alibi to be sufficient. They literally think that denial is material evidence because they exist in a universe of zero gravity as far as truth is concerned. And I'm telling you, you have to understand this. You have to recognize that these parallel alternative dimensions exist, because you might just be in the wrong one yourself. You know, like if what I'm saying, for instance, if you're thinking while I'm talking, if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but I care about the truth, I care about morality, I have values and so on, and you're a Westerner or you're a non-Muslim, say, then I'm telling you, you might be occupying the wrong dimension. You might be in the wrong universe. And that's probably why you are most likely constantly shocked. You're probably constantly disappointed. You're probably constantly disgusted and sad and depressed, because you keep expecting the moral physics of another dimension to operate in the Western dimension, and they don't. See, you live in a dimension that tells you that that woman who was going lockstep with Diddy for a full 10 years, doing every manner of degenerate things by choice, is a victim. And that makes no moral sense. That makes no moral sense at all. All because what? He might get angry? Well, you must be out of your mind. Get angry. Who cares? Like I said, the whole lot of them in that Diddy scenario, the whole lot of them are depraved. But you live in a universe that tells you otherwise. They tell you that some of those people are victims. And that has to torment your moral sense. You live in a universe that expects you to believe lies, because in that universe, truth doesn't matter. So if truth matters to you, it means you are in the wrong universe. You know, you live in a universe where the morality of massacring children is debatable. You live in a universe where a country with 40 million people in poverty, 12% of all children, where the federal minimum wage is below the poverty line, we have over 500,000 people homeless, where 33 million people don't have health insurance, 40 million people are food insecure, and most people will never be able to own a home. You live in a universe where that country gets to still call itself the richest country in the world. So no, you have to recognize. You have to recognize what universe, what dimension you belong in, and what universe or what dimension other people belong in, and you need to be with your own. You need to be in the right place with the right people and fortify that wall between the alternative, their alternative universe and yours, intellectually, spiritually, and morally.